Let's start at the 10,000-foot level, because this is going to be the next big fight, financial reform. Tell everybody at home why what happened in 2008, how close we came to a financial utter collapse, how close we are that that could happen yet again.
Well, we actually had the collapse, and everybody's applauding themselves because we, having had the collapse, then took trillions of dollars with a T and with an S at the end, pushed it back into the financial services sector and brought ourselves back from the abyss. But we had the collapse, we then revived the banks, commerce had come almost to a screeching halt, we lost 8 million jobs, there was a cataclysmic momentary collapse of the economy, and we then reinflated the economy with an enormous expenditure of tax dollars. Could it happen again? Yes. In other words, the question I keep asking those who are proponents of the reform bills, essentially the question is, would the current bill have stopped the cataclysm from happening? And the short answer is no. In other words, we will have this again almost inevitably. History tells us there are bubbles, there are collapses. Sequentially over history, they are getting larger and more cataclysmic. And so the question is, how can we create buffers both to minimize the likelihood and the size of the bubble and hopefully buffer the fall when it happens?
Let's talk about the reform and also the investigations. And some people say, hey, fine, the investigations, just political theater in Washington, why do I care? Tell why we need to have answers to questions that have yet to be answered, and why the financial reform, which I think you like, in rearranging chairs in the Titanic here, why they're both so critical right now. And I guess start with the investigations.
Well, first, understanding and holding people accountable. Take the accountability issue second. Understanding, if the plumbing breaks, you got to know why it broke before you can fix it. In other words, understanding where our financial system failed us is the critical first step to being able to repair it. I think we know more now than they did in 1929, because even though it is still a fundamentally flawed structure, there is greater transparency to it. We are having debates about credit default swaps and CDOs at a level of granularity that far surpasses what they knew a couple years after 29. Having said that, we haven't yet held people accountable, and I don't mean by that sending a few people to jail. Yes, it will happen, it should happen where there was criminal conduct. Really, what happened was an enormous failure of judgment. A failure of judgment on the part of those at the top of the financial system, the CEOs and on down on the private side, regulators who themselves embraced an ideology that was flawed. It was Alan Greenspan's ideology, Bob Rubin's ideology, an ideology of Ayn Rand libertarianism that didn't understand simple historical truths about finance, which is at the end of the day, it breaks down, greed overruns judgment, you lose all sense of proportionality, and there will be a crisis. Paul Volcker got it, Joe Stiglitz got it, Paul Krugman got it, a few others got it, but the ideology of Washington and Wall Street, and the two were interchangeable in terms of personalities, was so enmeshed in this libertarian, self-regulatory vision that we failed. And so we need to build something that will work. We went about 50 years, people forget this, we went about 50 years from the Depression of 29 until the mid-70s without a real crisis. Why? We had a regulatory system that worked. And so when Jamie Dimon says at the FCIC hearing that he told his daughter, well, this just happens every 5 to 7 years. No, it doesn't. Jamie, you're wrong. And when Jamie Dimon says that, he's displaying an arrogance, a grotesque arrogance, and a lack of understanding of financial history and finance. And so we need to build a regulatory system that gets Wall Street to do what needs to be done, which is to use their word, intermediation. Take savings, transfer it into smart investment in sectors that will grow the economy in terms of jobs and technology. Right now, what they're doing is building a casino. Witness the case against Goldman with Abacus and you know, all that stuff, without getting into the details of it, none of which is productive use of capital.
You know, one of the things that, especially for people in our region, is, as a sheriff of Wall Street, I think you're proud of the nickname you earned. Do these guys really believe in many cases they're the masters of the universe? Because it's funny, you go to dinner parties and you ask people to define derivatives, half the time they can't. Right. Did they really understand these financials of weapons of destruction they created? Was there a malice intent before it was put together?
No, I don't think, no. As I say, these are not bad people. These are people you do go to dinner parties with, and they're good people, they give to the same charities. They, like all of us, wanted to live in the ideological world that made themselves comfortable. And so they wanted to believe in the sort of libertarian worldview that they were doing good and doing right until it all collapsed. And
But
what
even after the fact, the debate we had over the
right.
bonus payments
No,
and
they
the
don't get it now.
compensation, the tone deafness that was
right
out
now
there.
they are tone deaf, and right now they don't get it. What I say to people, if you want to understand Wall Street, read one book and understand three letters. The book is Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe, still the best articulation, to use the phrase that he coined, the Masters of the Universe phrase. It's a brilliant book that captures that psychology, written, 2 or 3 crises ago. Bonfire of the Vanities, and then the three letters, OPM.
Don't watch the movie, by the way. Read the book.
Yeah, right, yeah. The great book, bad movie, as in, like the goats talking to each other in the junkyard. The great book, and OPM, other people's money. Wall Street runs on other people's money. And we have paid that price because what we have done is socialize risk, privatize gain. By which I mean, when things went south, the taxpayer came in to bail them out. When things were good, they got the bonuses. Now, right now, unfortunately, they're happening simultaneously. We've bailed them out, and they're taking the bonuses, which is why there is suddenly this enormous public upset, as there should be.
Well, let's talk about that populism, and then we'll get into what kind of real reform we should have. What's tweaked me a bit has been the manipulation of the populist rage, legitimate to a point. When you see Mitch McConnell talking about not just what he translates the reform to be, but he's sitting down with the lobbies. He's sitting down with the bankers trying to craft something that would be toothless in terms of what it would actually do. And the Monday morning, or the revisionist history, I should say, about, well, we shouldn't have bailed these guys out in the first place. Just tell people, if first Bush and then Obama, by extension, didn't rescue some of these financial firms, what we could have been looking at.
Right. Look, just so it's clear, there was no choice. Of course we needed to get the cash into the financial services system. Anybody who says we shouldn't have done that at all is either dumb or not being honest with you. The question is how we should have done it. In other words, what strings should have been attached. I have not faulted Geithner, and so it's clear, there was continuity. Not a break. There was continuity between Bush and Obama on this. We went from Paulson, Bernanke, and Geithner to Summers, Bernanke, and Geithner. This was, as I say, continuity you can believe in. This wasn't a shift in ideology. The error was not in getting cash into the system. We needed to do that. And the Lehman bankruptcy proved it. Everybody after that said, oh my goodness, this was a mistake. We can't let it happen again, or we will have a Great Depression. The mistake was then in the follow-through, what I call the 3 questions that followed. 1, who pays? It all came out onto the back of taxpayers rather than being borne, at least in part, by the CEOs, management, equity, and debt holders of the companies. That was a failure of negotiation, primarily on the part of Geithner and Summers and Paulson. Question 2, what reform do we get simultaneously? And here the reform has been not nearly sufficient. Forget Mitch McConnell. He is, as you say, not only grandstanding, but being fundamentally deceptive and dishonest. But even what Barack has proposed does not go far enough. And then the third question, which is long-term, our most important one, how do we create jobs? We must create an economy that creates jobs that pay reasonable wages. We are moving towards a bifurcated economy where those at the top who control capital do extremely well because capital can move anywhere. Everybody else is suffering. And that is the history of the last 20 or 30 years, and that long term is a dangerous history.